3 days after I buried my husband, I stood on my own porch and watched a locksmith's brass deadbolt catch the afternoon light where my old lock used to be. My clothes were stuffed into trash bags by the door. My mother's quilt sat folded on top of the pile like a parting gift. And in the doorway, filling the space where I used to walk through with grocery bags and paint cans, stood my husband's son, wearing his father's barn jacket like a uniform he'd been waiting years to put on. "My father's name," he said, loud enough for the neighbors raking leaves across the street to hear every word. "My father's house. You're nothing now." I didn't move. In my line of work, when something cracks under load, you don't flinch and you don't argue. You listen because the sound tells you exactly where the failure started. I'd spent 11 days as a widow and 3 as a woman locked out of her own home, and I already knew where this crack had started. I just hadn't let myself look at it until now. My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 41 years old, and I build houses for a living. This one, the one with the new brass lock and the trash bags on the porch, I built with my own crew, on land I bought with my own money, 2 years before I ever met the man whose name the whole town still uses for it. To understand what happened on that porch, and what I did 3 weeks later that made an entire family go quiet around a conference table, you need to understand what I let people believe for 12 years and why. I learned to swing a hammer before I learned to ride a bike. My father was a carpenter, the kind of man who could read a warped board the way other people read a headline. He died when I was 25 and left me his tools, his truck, and one sentence I didn't understand until much later. A name won't hold a roof. Load has to go somewhere real. By 27 I had my contractor's license and a one-woman outfit I called Dawson Custom Builds. That same year I bought 6 acres on the edge of town with every dollar I had, including what I got selling my father's old truck, which hurt worse than any mortgage payment ever could. I drew the house plans myself that winter. Kitchen facing east. A porch deep enough for 2 rocking chairs and an argument. In the corner of every page, the architect of record was me. Those drawings ended up matching more than I ever wanted them to. The company grew. 1 higher, then 3, then 7. And the spring I turned 28, I met Thomas Bennett at the lumber yard he'd run for 30 years, arguing about a late delivery. He had a laugh that made strangers feel like regulars, and a way of knowing everyone's name, their dog's name, their trouble. Half the county owed him a favor, and somehow they all loved him for it. Looking back, I think Thomas had a gift for borrowing that looked exactly like generosity. But at 28, across a diner table from a man who actually listened to me, I didn't see a warning. I saw someone steady. He courted me slow. 8 months in, he walked my land with me at sunset, got down in the grass, and told me he wanted to grow old right there. I said yes before he finished. On the walk back, he looked out over the acres, quiet for once, and said, "My family used to own half this county, you know." Used to. 2 small words doing a lot of work. I heard them. I filed them away and told myself a man's history was his own business, and that love meant not doing the math on it. That decision cost me more than the land ever did. We married the next spring, and I broke ground on our house that same summer. Dawson Custom Builds put up every stick of it, $310,000 of materials and labor, run through my company, paid from my accounts, built by my crew, on land I'd owned 2 years before Thomas ever knelt in that grass. My lawyer, an old friend of my father's, told me plainly before the wedding, "Keep the deed in your name, keep the business separate, sign a simple prenup." Thomas signed it at the kitchen table without reading past the first page. "Paper never kept anybody warm," he said, and laughed. I remember feeling relieved, like it proved he wasn't after anything. Here's the part that's mine to own. What came after wasn't his doing. The county had my name on the deed. The bank had my name on the loan. But at church, at the diner, everyone called it the Bennett place, and I never once corrected them. Thomas's shoulders would come up an inch every time someone said it. To cost me nothing, I told myself, to let him have that inch. Peace was cheaper than credit. I actually believed that, like a smart little proverb. While I signed checks in a kitchen the whole town thought his name had paid for. The day we moved in, before I hung a single picture, I hung one thing in the garage. My father's brass level, his initials engraved on the side the day I got my license. It hung there through everything that came after. Patient. Waiting. Remember it. Comes back. His son, Nathan, came with the marriage the way gravel comes with a driveway. He was barely 20 when I met him, raised mostly by his grandfather on stories about the Bennett name. The old lumber company, long since folded, the family pew at church, like the town had kept it all under warranty. Nathan opened a bar at 24. It lasted 14 months. He opened another at 26, better location, worse math, and it hung on 3 years before it died too. Both times the family story was bad luck, bad partners, never the boy with the good name. And both times I noticed something I didn't let myself understand. Nathan would call, and Thomas would take the phone out to the garage and stay gone past dark, coming back quiet, kissing the top of my head, telling me his boy was figuring things out. I asked once if Nathan needed help. "Nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart," Thomas said, so softly I didn't hear the hinge creak in the middle of that sentence. Those long calls to the garage had a price tag. It would take me 12 years and a bank statement to finally read it. Thomas died on a Tuesday in September. At the lumber yard he'd run for 3 decades, halfway between the office and a stack of decking. His heart gave out before the ambulance made it across town. For 1 week the whole town grieved like a single family. Casseroles stacked in my refrigerator like cordwood. Then came the funeral, and the seating chart his sister Patricia had arranged. A cream card on the front pew read "Family Only." Nathan sat front and center, in a suit still creased from the store. I was steered gently, 2 hands on my shoulders, into the second row. The widow in the second row, staring at the back of my husband's son's collar. I told myself grief makes people strange, and it wasn't worth a scene. I had a lot of practice telling myself things by then. 3 days later my key wouldn't turn in my own front door. Grief, it turned out, was the cheap part of that week. The expensive part was just getting started, and it came wearing brass fittings and a photocopied will. That first night, I slept on a couch in the staged model home my company keeps for clients, 15 minutes from the house I built with my own hands. I lay there in my funeral clothes, doing the arithmetic of my life in the dark. 41 years old. Widowed 11 days. Locked out of a house with my name on the deed by a boy with his name on nothing. In the morning my office manager, Rebecca, let herself in with a legal pad and a look I knew well. "Call a lawyer," she'd written. "So contract." I read it twice, and something under my ribs stood back up and dusted itself off. The lawyer, a sharp, dry woman named Diane, read my deed, my prenup, and Nathan's photocopied will in complete silence. Then she gave it to me straight. The land was mine before the marriage. The house was paid for by my company on my dirt, documented to the penny. Thomas's old will could leave Nathan his truck and his tools, but a man cannot leave what he doesn't own. The house was never part of his estate. Then why, I asked, am I sleeping on a showroom couch? Because possession is a fact, Diane said. And facts take paperwork to move. Worse, Nathan had already filed a petition to be named executor of his father's estate, and on the inventory of assets, line 1, he'd listed my house. Cloud on the title. It wouldn't win. Didn't have to win. It only had to sit there, fogging up my ownership until a judge cleared it. How did he have all this ready 4 days after we buried him? I asked. Diane looked at me over her glasses. Because he was ready, Mrs. Bennett. Dawson, I said, came out before I decided to say it. The town picked its side the way small towns always do, quietly all at once while smiling at you. By Wednesday, a client with a $200,000 addition on his lake house called to say now just wasn't the season for our work together. My crew had families, mortgages, kids with braces. That night my office manager ran the payroll numbers twice because I made her. 5 weeks left in the account. 12 years I'd carried a name that wasn't mine like it weighed nothing. It had been sitting on my company's chest the whole time, and now it was pressing down. The bank was supposed to be the easy part. I sat across from a loan officer and asked for a line of credit against my own house, the standard move, the responsible move. He turned his screen around. My address flagged. Probate case, disputed asset, pending determination. There's a cloud on the title, he said. We can't lend against contested collateral. I sat in the parking lot a long time after that, hands on the wheel, going nowhere. Nathan didn't own my house. He'd never paid a nickel toward it. But he'd spent $90 filing a piece of paper with my address on it, and that paper, not ownership, just a claim, was enough to freeze the value of everything I'd built. He'd learned that trick from somewhere, and for the next 5 weeks, in every way that made payroll, he wasn't wrong at all. That night, back at the office, Rebecca had pulled every banker's box out of storage. 12 years of invoices, receipts, canceled checks, tax bills, all paid from my accounts, all in my name. My whole marriage laid out end to end in carbon copies. It was quiet in a way that made my ears ring. Somewhere in those boxes was a folder I hadn't opened in years. Statements that came to the house in Thomas's name. The ones I'd filed away unread because a marriage runs on a certain amount of not looking, and I had always been fluent in it. That Thursday night, with the office empty, I finally opened it. A retirement account he'd bragged about letting ride for decades. A withdrawal in 2019. $51,000 wired out in 2 pieces, 8 days apart, to a company in Nathan's name. His second bar. The good location, the bad math. Then another withdrawal 3 years later. $33,000 more. 4 months before that, business folded, owing 3 months of rent. $84,000 gone quiet as snow, while my husband kissed the top of my head and told me his boy was figuring things out. I sat on the floor of that staged living room with the bank statements spread out around me, and for the first time since the funeral I cried. Not for Nathan. Nathan was never worth the salt. I cried because I was grieving 2 men at once, and only one of them had a headstone. Diane called twice the next morning, and her text read exactly the way she talks. Call me. We have a date and a problem. The date was for the hearing to clear my title, 6 weeks out, faster than she expected. The problem was what it would cost to get there. She laid it out plainly. To knock my house out of Nathan's estate inventory fast, we wouldn't just file the deed. We'd file everything, the land purchase, the construction costs, 11 years of taxes and insurance paid from my accounts, and what I'd found in that folder. The pension withdrawals. The wire transfers. The debts his estate still owed. Once it's filed, it's public record, Diane said. By Friday, everyone in this town will know he died broke, in debt, and living in his wife's house. I looked out her window at the courthouse square, at a bench with a small plaque thanking the Bennett family for donating it decades ago. Thomas had proposed to me on land he didn't own, and I'd spent 12 years making sure nobody ever checked the story too closely. Protecting the legend was the one thing he'd ever really asked of me. He just never said it out loud. I need the weekend, I told her. I signed everything Monday morning. The deed, the accounting, the pension records, every page. By Tuesday it was public. By Friday it was gospel, and there was no version of this town that could go back to believing the old story because now the new one had exhibit numbers. Nathan's sister-in-law Patricia called that night. No hello. You're tearing this family apart, Claire. Is that what Thomas would want? I'm not tearing anything apart, I said. I'm returning it. Signed for. The family wanted a meeting after that, the polite kind, the kind meant to make you feel unreasonable for saying no. I went anyway. Patricia's living room was full, her, a couple of cousins, a plate of store-bought cookies arranged like evidence. Nathan wasn't there, which told me this was the diplomatic channel first. The filings, Claire, a cousin said, in the voice men used to hand you a live wire. Airing Thomas's private business in a courthouse. He'd be humiliated. Pull the papers back and this family will make it right. Quietly. I looked around that room and understood something that almost made me laugh. Not one of them said the numbers were wrong. Not one. The math wasn't in dispute. The volume was. The truth was fine as long as it stayed at a whisper, managed the way every family debt had always been managed. I thanked Patricia for the coffee and told them the papers stay. Nathan's answer came a few days later through a lawyer, with a filing bold enough to trip over itself. An emergency petition asking the court to name him temporary custodian of the family homestead and legacy properties pending resolution. Legacy properties. My house renamed like a part still under warranty. The local paper ran it above the fold that Friday. Bennett Air fights widow for family homestead. Widow, sitting outside the word family like a dog left on the porch, as if a woman can't be both. The preliminary hearing took 40 minutes. Judge Marsh read the title chain out loud like she was grading a paper in front of the class. The land bought 2 years before the marriage, sole funds my name. The house built by my company, paid by my accounts. 11 years of taxes, 1 checkbook. She looked up over her glasses. On what theory is this property part of the estate? Nathan's lawyer stood and said a lot of words. Family homestead. Equitable expectation. The judge let him finish the way you let a dog finish barking, then struck the house from the inventory, denied the emergency petition, and ordered Nathan to vacate within 14 days. I sat there with Diane's hand briefly on my arm, and I didn't feel like fireworks. I felt like a foundation curing. Quiet. Permanent. But I want you to remember one detail from that hearing because I've kept it. Nathan wasn't surprised. Not once. He already knew there was no fortune, no homestead, nothing left to inherit but a truck and a stack of debt. He'd bet everything on one asset instead, that I would stay quiet the way I always had. It almost worked. His lawyer asked for one last mediation before the 14 days ran out. I almost said no. I'm glad I didn't because what happened in that room is the reason I'm telling you this story at all. The offer came by email 3 hours before the meeting. 11 pages of careful language dressed up as generosity. Nathan would vacate immediately and drop every claim. In exchange, I'd pay him $50,000, styled as a legacy settlement. Both sides would sign a joint statement for the record and the newspaper, affirming that the house and the marriage reflected the lifetime of work and generosity of Thomas Bennett. And the last clause, the quiet one, the load-bearing one, every financial exhibit would be sealed by agreement, and both parties would be barred from ever discussing the family's private finances again. They weren't fighting the math anymore. They were trying to buy the story back. Bury the truth in a vault and rent me my own quiet life for $50,000. With my signature on the lie this time, not just my silence. I drew 2 columns on a legal pad. Sign. Don't sign. Undersign. The house back this week, the fight over my cruise safe, casseroles with apologies tucked under the foil. All I had to do was swear, in writing, that Thomas's generosity built what my invoices built, and that $84,000 never left. Under don't sign. Months more risk, a public accounting read by strangers, the family gone for good, and the real man I'd loved remembered by his actual balance sheet instead of his laugh. There was no clean column. That's the part nobody tells you about the truth. Cost something real every time. I thought about my father, handing me that level the day I got my license. He never said congratulations. He said, every wall you raise will want to lean, kiddo. Your job's not to yell at it. Your job's to check it. $50,000 to never check the wall again. And then the sentence that finally landed, the one I'd been circling for 12 years. They weren't offering me my house back. They were offering me my old job back, carrying the family name quietly at my own expense with a raise. I drove to the mediation with the offer and signed. Long oak table. A wall clock with a tick you could set a heartbeat by. Nathan's lawyer read the terms out loud in a voice like warm syrup. Generosity twice, and I felt Diane go very still beside me. Nathan leaned forward, hands folded, and said the line he must have rehearsed the whole drive down. We're being generous here. More than we have to be. Dad would want the house to stay in the family. The house in the family, from a man 3 weeks out from a court order, spending his stepmother's $50,000 in a sentence on behalf of a father whose debts I was still paying off. I opened my folder. I set my father's level on the table first, brass against oak, and let it sit there while I laid out the rest. The land bought 2 years before I ever met Thomas. The construction invoices, 41 of them, paid from my accounts. 11 years of taxes and insurance, 1 checkbook. And then the last folder. The pension withdrawals. The wire transfers. $84,000, spent on a business that failed twice, while his father carried the secret to a heart attack rather than let this town believe the name was worth less than the myth. There is no family fortune, I said, looking only at Nathan. There hasn't been since before you were born. There's a widow who paid for all of it quietly for 12 years. And the whole time, the only thing this family was ever rich in was my silence. The room went past quiet. It froze. The clock ticked 4 times. 5. 6. It was Nathan who broke it, and not the way I expected. No shouting, no lawyer's objection. He just stared at the folders like a man reading his own test results, and when he finally spoke, his voice had shrunk down to something almost boyish. If the house isn't ours, he said, then what was my whole life for? For 1 second I felt for him. A kid raised on a legend by a grandfather who needed it more than he did, handed a famous name like a paycheck that would never cash. He'd spent his whole life waiting for an inheritance that had died before he was born. The name hadn't just cost me. It had raised him wrong, too. I reached into my bag and set 2 things on the table, sliding them across to him, his father's toolbox key, and the claim ticket for the folded burial flag. The only things in that whole story that were actually his. You can keep your father, I said, my voice as level as the tool in front of me. Whichever version of him you can live with. That's yours, and I'll never touch it. You can keep your father, Nathan. You can't keep my house. He looked at the key for a long moment, then stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out without another word to anyone in the room. No apology. I want to be honest about that because this isn't that kind of story. He just finally stopped billing me for one. The mediation ended without an agreement, which meant the court's order stood exactly as written. No settlement. No sealed exhibits. The legend was not for sale. Nathan didn't use all 14 days. He loaded a rented trailer 9 days in and left town in the dark. When I pulled into my own driveway that Saturday, a new key was waiting in my mailbox, no note, just the key, cold and small in my palm. I stood there a while, thinking about everything a person can lock with the wrong name and open again with the right paper. The house was cold inside and smelled like someone else's cooking, but it was mine down to the last nail. I sat on the bottom stair where I'd laced my boots for 12 years of job sites, and I cried once more, the last time in this story. Not for the Bennetts. For Thomas, the real one, soft where he should have been, honest with me in every way except the one that mattered. I let him go, both versions of him, right there on that step. That week I did 3 things I'd recommend to any woman listening. I took the settlement I never signed and put the money instead into fencing my property line, surveyed and staked and papered clean. I went to the courthouse and took my name back, fully, no hyphen, no apology. And I called the sign shop. By Friday my crew was bolting a new panel over the office door. Dawson Custom Builds, EST 2012, built by hand. 6 months on, the legal fight had cost me $18,000 and a hard winter of sleep, but the client who pulled out came back in the spring, hat in hand, and I took the job at my new rate. The estate closed the way small, empty estates do. A truck and a cabin sold to cover what was left of the debt. Nathan manages someone else's bar outside the city now, and I hope, in a way that surprises even me, that the name weighs less on him now than it used to. Probably won't, but I hope it anyway. Some people in town still call it the Bennett place out of habit, and I've stopped billing myself for correcting them. On the first warm Saturday in May, I took down the last thing hanging from that old life, a framed family tree that used to hang over the mantel, and drove one clean nail in its place. My father's level hangs there now, brass polished, bubble dead center in the window. Nothing, it turns out, ever had the deed but me. There's a young woman in my office now, learning to read a tape measure and pull a permit, and when she asked me last week why the level over my fireplace has someone else's initials on it, I told her the only thing I know for certain. A name is something somebody hands you and it can be taken back, argued over, spent. But what you build with your own two hands on paper that tells the truth is the one thing on this earth nobody can ever inherit out from under you.